Greetings, Chris Newman. Introduction to the Treaty of Waitangi, the documents. What it is, what it is not. So this is a very simple overview of the documents, and I've prepared something here for us. So let's start with the treaty itself, which was signed on February the 6th, 1840 at Waitangi. But where did that original document come from? Well, in 1839 August in London, Lord Normanby and his secretary and his office people prepared a 4,000 plus word document of instructions for Captain Hobson to guide his dealings with the Maoris in New Zealand and to help bring forward with them and the local settlers a treaty or arrangement which was going to turn the tide of history towards British common law and order. Now, when Hobson arrived in the Bay of Islands late January 1840, he had these instructions in mind and immediately set about, in the period from around January 28 to February 4, consulting with the locals, particularly James Clendon, the Reverend Williams and James Busby, and Hobson was assisted by his secretary, Mr. Freeman. They, over that period, these 4 people particularly, and any others who obviously were in the conversation, put together their rough notes. And we do have those rough notes in those journals from that time. They're recorded, and I can refer to you, particularly in this book, the Littlewood Treaty, True English text of the Treaty of Waitangi found, has illustrations taken from those journals. They're here. We know what was written and what was discussed at that time. So through the rough notes, James Busby, who had been living here and was bilingual, quite fluent in Maori, he drafted these rough notes into a text which was oriented in the direction of Lord Normanby's instructions, plus the discussions held by those players, those participants, who, of course, were, Clendon was very well versed in Maori affairs, and so were Williams, having had long residence here, very deeply steeped in the local traditions and understanding. So Busby's draft of the 4th of February brought together the simple but essential points of the treaty. So here we've got a document which then could be translated by Reverend Williams and his son on February the 4th. Now, it was Williams who subsequently wrote the Maori dictionary. So we know that this translation was the best that could be done at the time. Now, it was discussed by the chiefs and tribes on February the 5th, and the Tiriti document produced by Reverend Williams and his son was signed February the 6th, 1840 at Waitangi, and subsequently over the next few months at 7 other signings around the country. So we have a key document, Treaty, we have the draft by Busby and the rough notes. Now let's go on in time. In 1869, there was an official New Zealand government translation from the Maori into English by T.E. Young, and this is an okay version as well, because T.E. Young was drawing on, I'm assuming, the dictionary and good information he had at the time. And this accuracy between these 3 documents, the Busby's draft, the T.E. Young translation and Treaty, they line up very nicely. Busby's draft is now known as the Littlewood draft. It was found, it was lost around 1840 and found again in 1989. Now let's move on to what has become a little bit problematic in modern times. James Freeman, who was the secretary over here, because he was a very busy fellow and interested in what was going on, he made up his royal style report of 1840. But what was he writing about? Well, he'd been looking over the shoulder of these people who were very familiar with the matter, and Freeman had absolutely no experience in writing treaties or even being a secretary. He'd been in New Zealand just a week. He didn't speak Maori, had absolutely no idea of anything. However, he had a go at it, and his royal style report was not a draft, not a translation, and it was written after Te Tiriti. So you can see it's not the treaty. However, what is fascinating about this is Freeman, in his flourish, added in words like forests and fisheries, lands and estates, and he hinted that there was a partnership between Crown and Maori. Freeman's Royal Style Report is not a legal contract and it is not a constitution. However, in 1975, when the Treaty of Waitangi Act was passed by the Parliament, the Minister of Maori Affairs, Matthew Rata, introduced James Freeman's document and said it is the treaty in English. And he said it is, in the Treaty of Waitangi Act, it is the official English version, and it varies a little bit from the treaty in Maori. It varies in a huge degree because it includes all these other aspects which were not at all part of an agreement which the treaty was about, which was an agreement for the introduction of British law, common law. So what it is the People's Common Law Agreement, the treaty itself. And the chiefs and tribes and all the people of New Zealand and the Queen as a regent are all in agreement here. Then we end up with it being fumbled and messed up by James Freeman in this weird thing, which is Royal Style Report. And accordingly, as that got incorporated into documents and just floated around the place, and everyone thought it was the normal thing, it got passed in by the Parliament. Now, we've got a problem. We've got a document that's not the treaty, and yet they're pretending it is. Just to muddy the waters a little bit more, but we understand now how clear this can be, Professor Hugh Kafaru, and I'm going to add one more thing with his name, Maori Council. So he, in 1986, did a revisionist version. He a very clever professor, studied at Cambridge, English mother, part Maori father. He, as a member of the Maori Council, did a very subtle translation and changed the meaning of three key words, taonga, rangatiratanga, and kawanatanga. And he used those words to rope in these ideas, or just hint at these ideas of forests and fisheries, lands and estates, and a partnership. It's all kind of subtly worked in. So his version, his apparent treaty, is a revisionist translation because it changes the original meaning of the 1840 text. And I submit to you that the original drafters of the treaty, who lived among the original Maori chiefs and tribes, knew an awful lot more about the meaning of the words and the thinking of the people than Mr. Kafaru, who wasn't even a Maori tribesman, just had a connection through his father's line, distant with Maoridom, but he's involved with the politics of the Maori Council. He's producing a revisionist version. None of these guys refer to Lord Normanby's instructions. These fellows here, Freeman and Kafaru, but over here, Clendon, Captain Hobson, Reverend Williams and James Busby understood perfectly well what Lord Normanby was intending. Freeman didn't have any experience or any qualification or any authorization to even connect with Lord Normanby's instructions. So he's like the odd man out, floating around, and then you can see now how this has turned into a soap opera. And that's what we're suffering from now, because the fake or wrong version has been introduced through this Treaty of Waitangi Act, and all the politicians and all the lawyers and all the other players, including the Maori Council, who've got plunder to gain from this using this text, have settled on it. So now I've given you an overview, and we know that Te Treaty in Maori, and if we need to translate it, we can use the Maori dictionary or refer to the government translation of 1869, is the real deal. There is no ifs and buts, and all the confusion that's around this is deliberate to confuse the people of New Zealand and cut us off from the true meaning of Te Treaty and what it is. And now we know what it is not. Thank you. I hope this has clarified what should be a very simple matter for us all.